Now you're very welcome along to this evening's football show. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent, good evening.
Evening, Joe.
Got to be honest, Dan, I'm not sure I can face this conversation again. Yesterday was Kevin Kilban and David Myler to kick off the show. We then had another hour with Gary Breen and David Sneyd, in the midst of which there was Bernard Jackman and Kieran Cunningham reviewing the Sunday papers. Guess what we talked about there? And 7:30 this evening was Richard Dunn. So I'm not sure I can take it anymore. I had to watch the match. That was bad enough.
Yeah, it's like they've actually closed, like they've made these international windows more condensed. I don't know if you've noticed this. Like the travel, like there's actually one fewer day like between games, and yet it doesn't feel like it. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't feel like it's a bit more of a sprint, you know. And yeah, it's pretty deflating. You know, it's there's no other way of describing it really. Like I'm very used to this familiar feeling of Irish football crisis. You know, being here before. We've had these chats before, you know, and I've always said this, you know, like you have a bad result for an Irish team, and it's for all that we can talk about Irish football at sporadic intervals, you know, all year long at different points at different times. We can talk about this or that or whatever. You know, it's only ever like a national team malfunction that like prompts this type of debate, you know, this type of analysis and debate. And I've listened to a lot of things that you've been putting out and you know, listened to a whole lot of other stuff as well, in addition to just being around it and listening to press conferences and everything. And yeah, it's pretty bad. Definitely. This one is up there on the scale. When you hear anything being compared to, I think like the lads were this morning, for anything being compared to Cyprus in 2006, and you're in that general discussion that you're being mentioned in the context and framed in the discussion around those games, you're in a bad place.
Yeah. And it's a well-worn routine now, the fallout from these games, initial reaction and the analysis of just how terrible it was. And I think, I'm not sure which stage of grief we're at now in terms of the Irish fallout, but I think we're somewhere just past the, well, look, it's down to years of neglect conversation, and let's have the bigger conversation about lack of development in Irish football. And even that's a bit half-hearted because we've just had it so often. So I don't know. It's
yeah. There's layers to it.
It's the same old stuff.
There's layers to it. It's just a fact of life that sometimes it takes this result to have that debate. You know, like I remember after
we have that after every game.
Well, I know, but in particular, like I remember after the 5-1 playoff defeat against Denmark. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I remember that weekend doing a piece, but actually talking about the board and the FAI and all that type of thing that hasn't changed. And it would have been very hard to say pitch that piece a month previously. Say, you know, that it's you know, like you sort of see Brian Kerr on the TV talking about stuff. You see, you know, rude doctors' work being discussed, you know, in the last couple of days, which really is something that is a talking point at all times amongst people you would speak to in football, you know, on a consistent basis. But it does take these things to bring it to another level. And listen, so there's almost like, you know, what is it, macro and micro debates or whatever way you want to look at it. I'm no economist, but like there's obviously, you know, there's a broader debate here and about where we go, and then there's obviously a smaller debate, but it's often the one that energises people a lot more, which in Irish football always centres around the manager. That's what happens.
I disagree with your touch, actually, to be fair. I think we talk fairly routinely. I don't mean we and off the ball. I mean the Irish sports media and you as well in particular. I think we talk a lot about development in Irish football and what we haven't done and what we need to do and where we need to go. I think you and I discuss it quite a bit. It comes up quite a bit.
Right.
To be fair, I think it's a constant complaint. It's a constant, you know, I think it's fairly much to the fore of all our conversations about Irish football. I think as we've looked at this even steeper decline over the last 10 years in terms of the players Trapattoni had available when Richard Dunn was playing, who was on earlier, and we went through the squad, and goodness me, there's no comparison with now. I feel, you know, maybe one of the reasons it hasn't exploded in a big way after this game is because we're sick of having that chat, actually. I think it's all we've talked about.
Maybe I'm more so thinking in the current affairs, like entertainment genre of discussion where it comes out. You know, you will have had that today at various times.
Sure.
And maybe that's more so what I'm thinking of relative to, you know, this sphere as such, you know. But I know, listen, I take the point that you're saying, and like and to some respects, and I've been making this point in the last week, you know, and stuff I've been writing, like, I don't know what you feel about this, because, you know, there's a lot going on in people's lives at the moment, you know, and people are sort of, you know, people are pretty beaten down by everything. You know, like people are now waiting on the latest round of lockdown updates tomorrow evening when Ireland are playing Qatar. You know, are people going to be getting angry about Ireland Qatar tomorrow, or are they wrapped up in this? And I sort of wonder the extent to which, like, are people even really engaging with this crisis in the way that they would with previous ones? Like, are we almost beaten down by past disappointments?
Yes.
Like, in my world, of course, everyone's talking about it, but I sort of wonder, like, are a lot of people just more, they aren't any good.
Look, for all the, and look, because of the nature of my job, we have to do a 6-hour show yesterday, so of course we're going to do a lot on it, and we have to do a 3-hour show tonight, so of course we're going to talk about it. I mean, we can put a bow on this pretty neatly, and it's the same conversation in every WhatsApp group that follows sport. And it's like, people aren't that exercised about it. The brutal truth is, people watched the game and said, that was pretty terrible. The players aren't good enough. The manager's trying to play a brand of football we can't play. Luxembourg had some decent players, so it's not like they were complete no-hopers. Like, it wasn't the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. And it's pretty much in keeping with where we've been under Stephen Kenny. It's not a million miles away from where we've been over the last couple of years. Now, send a funny gif of a cat doing something silly and let's move on. That's where people are, I think. Look what
someone's going on a rant on Twitter again or something. Like, you know, I think tend to how it goes.
I think it was digested.
The games.
It was digested. It was digested pretty quickly. It was like,
but people aren't going. I really think that's something that's like, that is part of the debate. Like, we're missing a lot of the usual sights and sounds of these things. You know, we're missing the boos or not in the stadium at full time. We're missing the empty seats that represents loss of interest, a decline, or not. We don't really know. Like, I'm at this point the other day, it feels like the entire Kenny era has taken place on the internet, you know? Yeah. And I think, like, I'm in a position of being able to go to the home games at least. It's so surreal. Like, and this, by the way, this isn't a mitigation, right? This isn't a defense of anyone, because in fairness, I heard Kev make the point, Kev Laban make the point, and it's a very good point, but if someone wants to go down too far down the road of, well, we're missing the fans, you know, Ireland are missing the fans. The counterpoint is, there's a lot of young players there who don't have the pressure of the stadium, so in theory should be easier to express themselves. So you can take that argument, right, wherever you want to take it. But I do think there's something weird and strange about the fact that, like, you know, people, obviously there are people out there who are calling for Stephen Kenny to go, thinking that won't happen, right? But if it did happen, to imagine that, like, his entire, like, that he would have managed Ireland without ever having managed the team in front of a crowd at the Aviva Stadium. It's sort of unbelievable, you know. It's like you have a vision probably of what the job would be and what would entail, and the noise and the attention, and probably that opening night, and, like, you know, like, it's all played itself out virtually, like, in a weird sense. And I'm sitting there in the stadium on Saturday, and I watched the game back afterwards, and which is a punishment. But even watching it on TV, right, there's something a bit different about it on TV, that you have still the production values, and you have the familiar angle of, like, where you see things on the pitch on a TV game, and, you know, the mics might be turned up a bit in the sideline, and and we're so used to watching closed doors games like this, you know, in the Premier League or whatever. The players are probably used to it. But I was there, like, at one point with 10, 15 minutes to go on Saturday, and the game is just drifting away. And it is drifting away. It's visibly drifting away. And, you know, you hear the shouts from players and stuff. It's like walking by an Astro Park or something, hearing people shouting. You're thinking, this is a game that's about to trigger, like, a massive... You don't realise the storm this result is about to, unleash. And yet there's no real heightened sense inside the stadium of it at all, bar people raising their voices a small bit more. You know, it's like a real... It's a sort of a virtual reality experience. And I said that, like, you can spin that both ways, but it sort of feels like you'd like, you know, you would like at least to see what it would be like with a crowd there, and some of those usual barometers that we use to measure these things. It's just it's just weird, you know. Like, they are weird games. Like, even the build up to the Ireland goal, which you watch back, you know, the Luxembourg goal. Sorry. Like, there was actually twice where they went reasonably long to Shane Long, and the first time he handballed it, second time he sort of miscontrolled it and he fouled the player. You know, the Irish players, like, it's 5 minutes to go, players are just sort of walking back, you know, trudging back, preparing for Luxembourg to launch it, and you're thinking, God, if there's a stadium here now, people would be narky and getting at it and just, you know, really wound up and stuff. And like they always like sleepwalking into it, you know. And to be honest, that was evident from the early minutes on Saturday too. Like there was just no tempo or nothing really. You're thinking, oh no, like, you know, there was a sense of like foreboding there really early in the stadium. Don't know if that was the case on TV, but certainly something in the stadium we're thinking, this is way too flat, way too flat. And it never got out of that gear at all.
No, it sure didn't. That's an interesting phrase you used, his entire tenure almost taking place on the internet. And it's very appropriate then that I can't remember an Irish manager that has represented a culture war like this before. And it's, you know, played out in the internet. So maybe it's a product of the internet as much as anything. And I think it's a product of how he came into the game, that it was the Mick versus Stephen thing. And Mick represented, you know, old school values and be hard to beat and the professionalism that comes with the English game. And Stephen Kenny represented, you know, a hope that Ireland could be better and, you know, a domestic product that could be better as well. And people pick their sides. And that's another aspect of this whole thing, which is playing out and has been playing out in how it's discussed.
It's very draining, to be honest. You know,
it's very boring.
I find it quite draining. And listen, I say this as someone who's been involved in it to some degree, you know, and like, you know, you get the texts in, like, you know, the view of like the media sort of protecting Stephen Kenny type thing, and that's become part of the discussion and the camps and that whole discussion. But like it's sort of like, and you know, you sort of have it in your head that this if Ireland had got good results like in the last week, like the worst thing that anyone could have been is like triumphalist, you know. Like it just can't go that way, you know. It's and like you see this when the pattern of Irish managers coming in. So what is it now? If you change the manager, does everyone then on the other side flip to be supportive of that manager? And people like, you know what I mean? It's not constructive sometimes. Like I don't think some of the discussions around it are constructive. Like I thought Gary Breen was actually quite good yesterday, talking about how, in fairness, it's not as if Stephen Kenny is the only manager looking to play that can play that style of football, but also as a consequence of that if these things aren't working for Kenny, like I sometimes wonder, are people like watching all of the games, or if they have a predetermined conclusion about if it doesn't work, then this is why it didn't work. You know what I mean? So it didn't work well for the team on Saturday. So automatically Ireland now need to play a slightly more direct style as a consequence, other than maybe they just didn't do a very good job of what they were trying to do on Saturday. Like as was pointed out, Luxembourg were trying to play the ball out from the back and, you know, do some of the things, you know, play in a sort of a modern way, you know, that like, you know, play in a modern way that is tailored to suit the players that they have. And I think that it's like there's a very simplistic read sometimes on the discussion around where Ireland are, that the discussion is, well, don't have very good players, so we need to go back to what we used to do, you know, well, you know, at a particular point in time. Whereas actually I would sort of take a slightly different view on that and say, well, you have to play the system that best suits the players that you have. And we have to be conscious that, like, you look at the profile of the what appear to be the best Irish players in the generation coming through. You're looking at, you know, Jason Knight, Malumbi, Josh Cullen, Aaron Connolly, and attacking areas. You're not talking about any big lads there, you know. You're talking about smaller players, slightly more technical players in some of those instances that I mentioned. Now I know there's Adam Ida. We'll see what Ida, but Troy Parrott again, someone who's quite a tactical player. Although he's physically, I think he's got stronger. But I guess what I'm saying is that it's not as if like we necessarily have the players. I've been making this point to like defend the 18-yard box like we might have if you've got Richard Dunn or John O'Shea or a informed Shane Duffy in your back four, you know. So I think that like the principle of probably what Stephen Kenny is trying to do, I think, is correct, you know, to a point. But obviously the question is, can he necessarily either convey that message or implement it in a way that's successful and effective? And that's, to me, where the debate is. In this culture war, we can only play this way, we can only play that way. I think it's more of, well, I think he's probably on the right track in terms of what Ireland need to do, but they need to do it better, you know, like to do it better and maybe just get that message across in a better way. Or why isn't the penny dropping? But I don't know. Is there a switch that we flick and we revert back to something that worked before. I don't know. I don't think there's that magic code there, to be honest, but that doesn't excuse very valid discussion about Stephen Kenny's tenure, because if you lose at home to Luxembourg, and I've said this along, you put yourself in the shop window for abuse, and that's fair game. That's part of the job. I don't think you can defend Saturday. I think it raises very valid questions, and that's fair enough. But sometimes to suggest we have to go back to doing something, like it's not as simple as that.
So what was the biggest issue with the performance then on Saturday?
Stephen Kenny actually said on Friday that the team needed to play with speed, to play with a bit of tempo. And that wasn't really the case at all. I'm not going to come on here and talk like a tactical expert, there's ex-pros who can do that in a much more, knowledgeable way. But to me, I sort of wonder that he almost become a bit of a slave to the system on Saturday, in the sense that there was a change to the 3-5-2 during the week, which I think made sense for a variety of reasons. The wing backs, we talk about Doherty and Stevens on endless occasions, but also even to get Connolly into a front two. And I think, the fact that Serbia play something similar, so there's an element of like matching up to what they do, but then being able to expose them in a particular way when they broke. Yet when it came to the game on Saturday, you're just there in the second half looking at it going, well, okay, so they're now playing three at the back, but Doherty and Stevens have gone off, so it's now McLean and Alan Brown as the wing backs, which definitely wasn't the vision when, speaking about like a system that suits your better players. With Connolly out of it, you didn't have that pace then through the middle at all. So, Robinson likes to come short. Collins is not quick. He's, Collins, you need him like sort of 15, 20 yards closer to goal than what he was, most of the time. And you're thinking, this isn't really working here. And I would have spoke to some people, again, football heads, like between the two games, who were pretty confident that they would probably switch to a back four to avoid a situation where you end up in the Luxembourg game having a lot of the ball, but just in the wrong areas, because you've an extra player defensively that you maybe don't need. As much as Luxembourg weren't a park the bus team, and they weren't going to be, but they just had a real, they moved in tandem together as a unit, whereas Ireland, just a lot of space that wasn't being inhabited. It just didn't have the pace, or just there was nothing, And even when Robbie Brady came on, then there's a different type of. See, we talk about Alan Brown as, say, a number 10, who sort of leads the press in a way too, in that respect, and he sort of drives teams on. So you bring Brady on, but he was just trying to get involved in the ball, drifting wide, putting in crosses. But there was something about the balance that just was completely off, And listen, maybe just being making it a systems thing is too simplistic as well too. There just was a lack of general energy and innovation and pace about how things were operating. Like it was pretty uninspired. I think that's the fear, It's that it was lifeless, and again, like even good Stephen Kenny teams, in his past, albeit at different levels, but even in Europe, when he was playing against good teams, like they weren't that sort of slow, methodical type of team that I think they're being caricatured as now. Even the description, like they're doing things like an academy coach might and stuff like that. They actually were sort of pretty in your face at times and high tempo, and it's just. But like I must say that some of the games at home, like the Bulgaria game in November, it's quite similar. It's just thinking, God, this is just all very safe. And
well, even on the point you're making, I mean, we had Richard Dunn on earlier, and he was just talking about a lack of variety, and lack of pace, or just mixing it up. That it's all a bit too predictable. It's all in front of teams, and they'll recognise the patterns we're trying to play too. And it was noticeable. Robbie Brady came on straight away. Gary Breen made this point yesterday, and he makes a run in behind. And I've no problem with Ireland trying to beat the Luxembourg press on 23 minutes, not being able to do it, trying again on 25 minutes, still not being able to do it, and going again. Like, you do have to stick to trying to play football because it's where the game's gone. But at the moment, it feels like sticking rigidly to that probably, and almost, not paint by numbers, but probably something in that vicinity, as opposed to really trying to hurt teams. That's the sense I'm getting from.
You sort of wonder, It's funny. It's one of these ones that sometimes you don't really find out until after the event necessarily, you know. But
Yeah,
like, are players just like sort of slavishly following instructions? Is it their definition of what the instructions are? You
yeah.
know what I mean?
And you could say,
Like
to be fair, you could say diligently as opposed to slavishly, because I'm sure Stephen Kenny, I've no doubt, given he wants the team to express themselves, I've no doubt he's saying to them, if you see something's on, let's try it. I suspect anyway.
yeah, I should say, yeah. As I said, his teams have never. There's a depiction of what he's wanting, that what he's supposed to want from the team, because of things he said. To be fair, you know, in media and stuff,
Yeah.
that has led to a sort of perception of what a Kenny side is, which I don't think it is. Like as I said, it didn't even look like a Kenny team the other day, you know. But then again, Kenny teams always had wingers with pace, you know, and he's playing a wing back system that he didn't always play. So, like, you're sort of, you know, you're thinking like, did everyone just freeze in the moment a bit, including management? Like, I think they were worried about this game for a while. Like, I think they knew that Luxembourg were good, you know, or certainly better than what they thought. You kind of wondered, do you become paralyzed by that sometimes to some degree? You know, that like, is it overthinking it or something in some way? You know, that like, if Ireland bring the best of what they have to the game, then let Luxembourg react to that. Whereas it more so a case of I don't know, Ireland wary of what Luxembourg can do. I don't know. That's what we'll hear in due course, you know. Certainly listen to Stephen Kenny today. I know you're going to play out some Stephen Kenny, but so, you know, I'm not entirely sure will this all be covered in the clip, but certainly the like, he's certainly putting a lot of stock on, say, the front three on Saturday, Brown, Robinson, Collins. That, like, he even made the point that he thinks they really missed Aaron Connolly, not because of, say, like, Aaron Connolly can frustrate the hell out of people, but it's more what Aaron Connolly does. You know, that pace that he provides and the runs that he makes and what that does, and that the runs he made in Serbia probably created space for Alan Brown to run into. And when they didn't have that service on Saturday, then the domino effect couldn't happen. But listen, the obvious point that you throw back at that is, well, if you didn't have that player who provides that game-breaking capability within that system, then why did you play that system? So like that. So like, yes, you're unlucky Aaron Connolly didn't play. It's correct. But obviously, did you react in the best way to Aaron Connolly not being there? And that is where, you know, that's a very valid criticism that you have to accept. Like, I thought, as much as, you know, he doesn't necessarily fit, I'm not sure if he ticks every box for Stephen Kenny, but the game probably did need Shane Long's pace, maybe, just for that change, you know, to turn Luxembourg a bit at times. And you can even see when he came on, listen, he made some mistakes and stuff too, but he did probably get behind them and cause them a few problems. And it just wasn't enough. As I said, there wasn't enough variety, you know. And even when they did try later on to go to direct a bit at times, it wasn't necessarily, you know, it was a bit hit and hope at that stage, you know, as opposed to a real coherent plan.
Yeah, look, I don't know what more there's to say about it, really. I mean, time is only going to tell if this generation Kenny has put his faith in will live up to the billion. And that's kind of the question mark at the moment, isn't it? How many of the Knight, Malumbi, Cullen, Aaron Connolly, Troy Parrott generation will be Premier League players in 5 years' time? That's the interesting question.
We don't know. And listen, the discussions taking place this week about if you look at the dearth of players in the Irish squad that are probably in that 23 to 28 age bracket, players who are technically in the prime of their career. You know, so like Duffy, Hendrick, Robbie Brady, Matt Doherty are turning 29 this year, and like you have already turned 29, and you then have like there's a small number of players in their mid-20s, Robinson, Cullen, Alan Brown, and so on. Some of whom have never played in the Premier League or very fleetingly played in the Premier League. And then you have this gap back to this group coming through, and we don't know where they're going to go. And that's part of the issue that we face. I mean, time is one thing. I mean, the one thing I probably should touch on is obviously the FAI EGM press conference that we had yesterday, where we had Roy Barrett speaking yesterday and Jerry McEnany speaking yesterday. And look, a pretty strong backing, it would have to be said, of Stephen Kenny. a backing that basically suggested that the result tomorrow night won't, it's not as if he's under pressure to sort of get some result. I think that's fair enough. I think Qatar could cause Ireland a lot of problems, by the way, but that's a slightly different subject. But they're almost like a club side who know what they are, and this Irish team doesn't know what they are at the moment. So that game to me screams difficulty, actually. But there'll be more derision if you don't get a result. But it does appear that the FAI are very much on board still with Stephen Kenny and willing to give it time, very much willing to give it time. And really, on balance, I still think that's the right thing to do. But it's obviously, the debate is more fraught, in the aftermath of Saturday. But unfortunately, we do have loads of time at the moment. Like there's if you were thinking about changing things up anyway, which is maybe a discussion, it's unfair to have it, but if you were to think about having that, if that was in the back of the mind, some kind of another succession plan, and in your head of what you might do, it's so long to Ireland actually have a game in the Euros campaign now that, like, what are you going to do? Like, it doesn't make any sense to change things now. It makes far more sense to give it more time and see, can this work? Can we make this work? And that's, in my opinion, it's the right thing to do. But obviously, there's a lot more scrutiny on the decision to do that now in the aftermath of Saturday. And that's fair comment as well.
By the way, that EGM you mentioned, so I saw in your piece in the Irish Independent, you were saying there were on-the-record quotes about allegations of gerrymandering and that one of the representatives of the Players' Union described the construction of a new governance structure as shambolic and undemocratic. So the football family's getting on as well as ever, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there were votes in it that were passed by sort of, heavy majorities, it must be said. Again, without getting bogged down into it, this is obviously a fallout of the Delaney years, and you have effectively a new FAI administration there now at the moment, who the function of the EGM, people talked previously about council and all these FAI the strands of governance as such, and they're introducing like a new General Assembly, which is actually bigger, but the way in which it's been introduced, has raised questions about, have they done enough work to make sure that all the various strands of the game are represented in the new power structure that's going forward. It's a heavy debate to get into, and I'm not sure I want to get into it in great detail now to pour over it. But to summarize it, yes, it's part of a new power structure, but there's obviously a feeling. Stuart Gilhooly from the Players' Union went on the record afterwards with regard to the view that there hasn't been enough consultation, in his view, about how these changes are being brought through. Like questions that were being discussed yesterday, will going forward, will there be too much representation for certain sections of the game relative to others, and where we go? But listen, the broader point is that there's still, it's not a happy family by any means. It was a fake happy family before, and now there's definitely, it's more an open process that people will air their frustrations at meetings and have a go, but doesn't mean that they're actually happy with the bottom line.
Okay. With the view to Qatar tomorrow, we'll play some of Stephen Kenny's press conference out before we go this evening. Doherty and Egan both injured. That rules out the wing backs plan.
Stevens.
Sorry, Stevens. Excuse me, Stevens. Yeah. So that rules out the wing back plan, we can safely say. It was interesting. So the Qatar thing is brewing over the last while. Germany followed Norway's suit and staged a protest. The Germans spelled out human rights on their jerseys, 1 letter per man type thing. And I mean, technically, FIFA's disciplinary code does allow FIFA to take disciplinary action here if you're using a football match for demonstration of a non-sporting nature. So that's kind of in the ether. No action taken yet. I mean, The Guardian in particular have done amazing work on this, and we've often spoken to some of their journalists who've done the amazing work over the last couple of years. And last month they made headlines again by just putting forward the fairly shocking headline that since 2010, 6,500 migrant workers have died. Now, not all of this is around just stadia, but it is part of the overall infrastructure overhaul which is happening. So it's all World Cup connected, really. We're talking about the migrant workers as we know at this stage. I think everybody's pretty familiar with this story from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. We're averaging out at 12 per week, which is fairly shocking. Young men in the main. And it's very striking. This World Cup bid, in the context of sports washing and what it aims to do, really, Qatar's World Cup bid has only exposed their failure to protect I think it's about 2 million strong migrant workforce. What was interesting in the piece in The Guardian last month is that The Guardian pointed out that a huge number of the deaths have been caused by natural causes. So that's what the cause of death is put down as, natural cause, which is suitably vague, often heart or respiratory illness. As high as 69% of the deaths are just natural causes. So you can imagine the families at home are getting a phone call saying, we found your father, husband, brother dead in his room this morning. There were I read a couple of stories from families that had that experience. So yeah, he's dead. It was natural cause, no autopsy, no information. And here's his €945 in unpaid wages, no compensation required. Thanks for everything. To be brutal about it, that's what's happening. And that's obviously very unsatisfactory. Could you imagine? I mean, a lot of things wrong with what's going in all countries.
Oh, listen, yeah.
It's horrific.
Yeah.
Now, in 2019, The Guardian pointed out UN research did accept that heat was a factor here. And often they're working at nighttime because the conditions are just unimaginable for us. I mean, the heat there is horrific. So they feel that is connected in part to what's going on. But obviously, there's a degree of guesswork here, and it's natural causes and no further investigation. And interestingly, a final point, The Guardian pointed out that in 2014, Qatar's own government experts recommended autopsies. They said, really, this should happen. And it's never happened. And that was 6 years ago. Now, the Qatar government have come out and said, look, these figures are not quite right, that they include white-collar workers who've lived in Qatar for many years. And they said only of the 2 million workers, 20% are in construction. And so the death ratio they are arguing is within the expected range. But again, The Guardian dug into this and said there were inconsistencies and a lack of data in their explanations. So we take that in so much as we want to take it with however big a pinch of salt we want to take it with. So that's the context. Sorry to rub it on. That's the broad context. And that's the latest in the last month of where this story is. So 10 years, 6,500 migrant workers and appalling conditions. And we've seen the videos and it's just all beyond horrific, really. So Stephen Kenny was asked about this today, Dan, I know, and he wasn't afraid to get stuck into it.
No, he wasn't. I think, listen, it seems almost sort of, hack-like to sort of bring it back to the football debate. I think if things were going better for Stephen Kenny at the moment, I'd imagine he would have embraced it even more, as a discussion point. Yeah. But he, and I think he was almost conscious of being seen to do that to some degree. But he was asked the question, he answered it. Stephen Kenny is someone who, in his program notes as Dundalk manager, would go into, social issues. So it's not like, it's a new thing or anything. Someone who's very engaged by it, sort of get a program notes about the sort of the housing crisis or the nurses strike or the Savile inquiry, from his time in Derry in particular, be very much on sort of sensitive to that. And he basically said it was obviously unacceptable. Again, I might be playing some of that, but he said it was unacceptable, the deaths. He referenced the deaths. It was a lengthy answer. Didn't quite. He said that there was no planned protest, or anything like that planned, but that he's a big believer in freedom of speech, so it would have no problem if the players suddenly decided they wanted to do it. But you do have that sense. I think Daryl Shelvey was asked about it. Was it yesterday or at some point last week? And I think probably you get the sense that people would say, well, the Irish team should take a stand, or do something. And I completely endorse where that's coming from. But I think I almost have this lingering sense that they just feel that they're in some sort of football crisis as it is, and that they're not going to pick the moment to do something like that, if you know what I mean. Because people will probably think that's weak or something like that. But the flip side of that is that people would say, well, go and do your job. Don't get involved in this at the moment. You keep losing. You're not winning a game. Why are you getting distracted by this? Look at him. He's going on about this when he should be doing that. So it's a bit of a no-win question to some degree, I think, to discuss that. But he didn't didn't shirk it, and I would suspect, you know, at a different point in time, you would
engage more.
get a different answer. Yeah.
The quotes I have, I just saw them before we came on air as well. He said, I think there's a clear issue with human rights in the building of stadiums in Qatar. The number of people that have died, you can't sweep that under the carpet. It can't be ignored. Initially, the Norwegian team and various others have backed that. They're entitled to do it with good reason. It's not acceptable for people to lose their lives. The disparity of wealth between rich and poor, to have people living in conditions of squalor and people dying in those conditions, is not acceptable. That's strong, very good, very strong.
You answered the strong quotes. No, they are strong quotes. They're on the record. They're there. Just like, you know, I think at another time it would have been a broader discussion, perhaps. But,
sure.
You know, it just wasn't necessarily something that came onto the agenda today, rightly or wrongly.
No, I understand. Gareth Southgate was asked about it as well. And just to give a flavour of what other managers are saying, he said, in terms of the situation in Qatar, the FA are working closely with Amnesty International and will be talking with Qatar as well. My understanding is Amnesty don't want the tournament postponed or moved. They want to work and highlight issues that could be improved. So it's important we work with organisations like that. That's taking a slight step back from Stephen Kenny. I mean, if Southgate had said what Kenny had said, it'd be big news.
That was, you know, that's a I'm going there sort of response, isn't it? You know, as well too. Like it's like like the call today, like these Zoom conferences are just listen, you know, I hate them. But you know, it's just like, but there was all sorts of, like, there was BN Sports were in there today, and other, you know, I think there was some, I don't know, were they local Qatari journalists or whatever in there as well and stuff. Of course, like that. So it's really, you don't know who you're broadcasting to sometimes in those debates and discussions, and like, you know, how you can understand how Southgate, listen, we all want everyone to be principled and saying the right thing. You know, I think it's important that people use their voice, but the reticence probably comes from somewhere. You know, Southgate's probably thinking of it's a long way to this tournament. I have to go there, and you know, the English manager speaking can take things off in a different direction. And you'd like to think it wouldn't be that way. Like, you really admire the stand taken by the Norwegians and by the Germans. But like, the thing about the Qatari thing is, obviously, you know, they got the tournament because of a dreadful voting process involving FIFA that every football association in some shape or form can accept some kind of responsibility for it, because they've all played the game to some degree, you know, in some shape or form. And that, like, when the tournament was awarded was really the time when football associations and probably football people could have taken a very strong stand against it, stop it. But they don't do that because a form of like realpolitik that exists. And then the focus is shifted on to players and managers to speak about it. And it's important that they use their platform to do it. But like, the opportunity was missed by a lot of the people who pay the wages to these people, you know, and that's just something that should be pointed out.
Very finally and brief as you like, to be honest. So Qatar, just having a look here, their rankings, they were down kind of around the 100 marker until about 2017. And since then, they've had 3-4 years of scooting up there, 55th to 58th over the last 3 years. So they're currently 58th in the world. So by Luxemburg standards, Dan, we're in for a tough night there. What are we expecting?
Well, they're top of the group if they've been allowed to play in the group. You know, like they're in the group schedules. They'd have 6 points in the bag from beating Azerbaijan and beating Luxembourg. You know, they're clearly not bad. All their players are based in Qatar. They've got naturalized players in there. You know, living in better conditions than most people who get taken into the country. And so they have a couple of Sudanese players, French lad, a Portuguese-born player, and a couple of others. They have a Spanish manager. But they're effectively in a World Cup preparation camp, you know, and their result, they've been to Copa America 2 years ago. They got 1 point in their group, but they weren't embarrassed. And they've sort of got steadily better. Their results against European sides and friendlies, beat Switzerland a couple of years ago, drew with Iceland. And then in the last week there, they had those wins. So I think they're basically a bit of a nightmare opponent in some ways for them, I think, because they know exactly what they are. Like, most of them play for the same club or for 3 clubs. So they will have a firm identity and an understanding and an awareness of each other and what they are. And clearly Ireland are really struggling with that thing at the moment. So this is actually a pretty tough game. And listen, there'll be no sympathy if Ireland lose to Qatar. You know, like that's a headline. Qatar, you know, the general public will look at that and be unforgiving, and then you have more issues. So, I mean, you know, this is not like there are friendlies that are, you know, a nice way to get back on the horse. But I don't think this is one of those ones, no.
Okay, good. The good news keeps.
There's no uplifting. Yeah, there's no uplifting. But Ireland are playing Andorra in the summer, Joe. So all going to plan. If there's no wins after 11, there should hopefully be 1 and 12.
W. Tick. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. Thank you.
Thanks.